Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. You should pursue righteousness. What's the reiteration of tzedek, tzedek? Tzedek, tirdof. Meaning, make sure that the court is a qualified court, have that level of integrity, that their rulings are going to conform with the laws of truth, of justice. What's the reiteration? Tzedek, tzedek. So Rashi cites the Chazal, it's a Gemara. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, halachacha bezna yofer. I mentioned yesterday, Mar tells us in Sanhedrin that if you have two qualified courts and they're both qualified to rule on this particular issue, it's not as complicated. You need the higher court. If you have a choice to go to the more advanced, to go to the more advanced rather than the less advanced. Although the lesser court, if you don't have the higher court to adjudicate that case, the lower court is qualified. But if you're able to go to the greater court, you should go to the greater court to adjudicate that same halacha. That's what the Torah is. That's the reiteration of tzedek, tzedek. Just bring it there. The question is why? I mean, if the lower court is no less qualified than the higher court, why, if you have the ability, the opportunity to go to the higher court, go to the greater court rather than the lesser court? Mantichya, so that you should live. You should live and you should be able to inherit the land which Hashem is giving to you. So Rashi over here says, it's worthwhile to make sure that the judges you appoint to adjudicate these laws are qualified. And ksher means more than qualified in terms of knowledge. As we said, they have to be tzaddikim, that regardless of the issues, they give of themselves totally. And if they have to extricate themselves, they do. Whatever they have to do, they do. Lahachis Yisrael, uloshiven alan moson. The Jews should be able to be maintained in life and to assure that they live on their land. We find that Chazal tell us that there are a number of groups of people which are einim makabel b'nei Shechina, which Hashem has nothing to do with them. One of them is kat shakronim, a person who lies, that he doesn't say truth. Lie doesn't mean he's a pathological liar, that whatever he says is not true. It means even when he says truth, it's not whole truth. It's intermingled with some degree of non-truth. There's nothing wrong with a slight exaggeration, but a gross exaggeration is not truth. Is not truth. And some people, whenever they tell you something, they can't say it exactly as it is. They always exaggerate, or they don't give you the facts exactly as they are. It's not truth. The Gemara tells us that the signet of Hashem is truth. That's a signet. And the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that every court that convenes, if they meet all the prerequisites of a court, Hashem convenes together with them. It's based on a pasuk in Tehillim, Elokim nitzav daskel. The Elokim, which always represents Midas Adin, nitzav daskel. He stands together with the congregation of Hashem. Meaning, when the court convenes, the Gemara says, their verdict is always correct. Why is it correct? Because the judges, they see through the eyes of Hashem. Hashem gives them that understanding, that ability to see it as He wants them to see it. That's Elokim Nitzav Daskel. So to be able to have Him involved, and that's the only reason why the verdict is a correct verdict. It's always truthful because Hashem is always giving the Dayonim, the judges, the ability to come with the verdict of truth. That's the verdict of truth. Bring this out in a moment. We have a law of Edom Zomimim. if two witnesses testify and the court gives a ruling, and before the ruling is actually actualized, for instance, two witnesses testify, they're interrogated, and the person, there's a verdict, the person, the murderer must be put to death, or the person who violated Shabbos must be put to death. And before they actually put him to death, other witnesses come and they say, Imonu Yisem. And they say, how could have you seen this person violate Shabbos or commit murder? You were elsewhere with us. So there's a chiddush in the Torah, a novel concept, that you believe the latter group and the first witnesses are found guilty and they're considered they lied. And the Torah says what they conspired to do to the person who they testified against, we do to them. So the witnesses are put to death. What happens if factually the verdict was carried out and the person was put to death? The witnesses, although they're found out to be lying, they're not put to death. Or whatever they conspire to do, it's not applied to them. Why? Because Torah says, Kashizom of Kashiboso. That's the inference. They only receive what they conspired to do only if it's still on a conspiracy level. But if it actually was actualized and the verdict was carried out, Gzeres HaKosuv, then you don't do to the witnesses what they conspired because it goes beyond the conspiracy. That's the Gemara. Okay? So the question is, and if Hashem convenes with every court, and the court met all the prerequisites of what a qualified court was, if that's the case, and they saw through the eyes of God, how was an innocent man put to death? But factually, there were Eidim Zobim. And if they came too late, an innocent man was put to death, because the first group was found to be conspiring. The answer is, the verdict is true, is correct, and they saw through the eyes of Hashem. What does that mean? Hashem wanted that person to be put to death. Was it for this particular crime? The answer may not have been. But the verdict is what is a valid verdict. It's not an untrue verdict. It may not be true within the context of the testimony, that because he violated Shabbos or because he committed murder. But Hashem wanted that man to die. So that was a correct verdict. So the court doesn't even have to tshuva. If a person, God forbid it, accidentally kills a person, he has to go to Ori Miklot. Why does he have to go to Ori Miklot? So the Gemara says in Makkos also, going to a city of refuge till the Kohen Gadol passes away, that's kapara. That's an atonement. He's not permitted to leave that city of refuge until the high priest passes away. And remaining, that level of incarceration is considered atonement. Because there, that Hashem allowed him to take another life, even inadvertently, means he failed at some level. Therefore, he needs atonement. But the court, following all the protocols and the prerequisites that Hashem prescribes, the Torah prescribes, they exactly carried out exactly what Hashem wanted. Hashem wanted this man to die. Although it may have not been for that particular transgression or crime, doesn't make a difference. That's don din emes lachito. That's considered a truthful judgment, and that's Elokim nitzav daskel. But what about if they're not qualified dayanim? That's not truth. Now, Eretz Yisrael is what? Is Eretz HaKadosha. Why is Eretz HaKadosha? Why is it the Holy Land? Because that's God's location. The Gemara tells us that every location in the world has an archangel overseeing that location. The only location that doesn't have an archangel is Eretz Yisrael. Because since we are the Am Hashem, there is no separation between ourselves and Hashem. He oversees that land. That's the reason why Chazal tell us that if a person sins in Eretz Yisrael or sins outside of Eretz Yisrael, sinning in Eretz Yisrael, it's a much more severe sin, although it's the same sin. Why? Because when you sin in Eretz Yisrael, it's called you sinned b'palton shel melech. You sinned in the palace of the king. It's like you sinned in his presence. When you sin outside of Eretz Yisrael, it's like you're outside of the palace. So the severity, not because the innateness of the sin, because in terms of the location, makes it much more severe. That's the understanding. It's Eretz HaKadosha. What level of truth must you achieve in Eretz Yisrael? The ultimate. Tzedek Tirdov. The more qualified, even though the lesser court may be qualified to adjudicate it, but that the person understands, we have to achieve the ultimate level of truth. Even though the lesser may be sufficient, but if you have the ability to go to the greater court, it's beyond any doubt, even the lesser is, but if you compare the two, relatively speaking, it's more absolute when you go to the greater court. Because what are we dealing with? If the signet of God is truth, you have to meet the level of truth at the ultimate level if you have the ability. Of course, if the court is a corrupt court, it has no relevance to truth whatsoever. So, of course, you can't go to the court, although that may be the only court available. You don't go to that court. But if they have another court, a more qualified court, a more advanced court, you go to the more advanced court. So I was thinking, but why? So I was thinking, we find that Moshe Rabbeinu, initially he adjudicated all the cases of Klal Yisrael. And his father Yisro sees this, and he says, your behavior is not appropriate. Why? Because eventually you're gonna wither. Because there's no way you could keep that caseload going. So Hashem says, and he says, why don't you consult with Hashem? And that's when the judicial system was instituted, the lesser courts, the greater courts, whatever it is. I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand what Yeshua said, novel Tibol, that ultimately this can't continue. The answer is, Moshe of course understood it. But Moshe held, who was Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu was the intermediary between Hashem and Klal Yisrael. Seeing Moshe Rabbeinu, being exposed to him, coming in his presence, that he should adjudicate your case and he should ask you the question, that interaction, that difference made a difference between like day and night. Moshe Rabbeinu says, since ultimately, even though it can't continue forever, but whatever impact I have on the people coming before me to adjudicate their cases, it's worthwhile for that. And the Medrash says explicitly, Moshe Rabbeinu knew it would have to come to an end after a certain period of time. But it was worthwhile for that reason alone. Yisro said, but ultimately we have to set a system that has to be an ongoing system. That's the back and forth between Moshe Rabbeinu. So if we say the court, it says, Elokim nitza b'askel. Hashem convenes with the court. So what level of truth, if the king is here, the Shechinah is here, what level of bezdin do you need? If you're able to have a more advanced bezdin, a lesser bezdin, for the Shechinah to come, which kind of court do you bring? You bring a more advanced court. Not that the rulings mean any less truthful. It's just because the reality is the process, the way it works, is because Elokim nitza b'askel. The reason why every judgment is truthful, if they meet all the criteria of what a court is because the Shekhinah convenes with them, and the judges see through the eyes of God. That's the reason why every verdict is a correct verdict, even if later it's found out the witnesses conspired. So if the Shekhinah is here, who do you bring for the Shekhinah? You bring the most advanced court. Anything less than that, relatively speaking, is considered inappropriate. That's tzedek tirdov. And if you have that level of understanding, the Yerashis Oretz, maintaining that level of sensitivity to Hashem, and this is literally Shivisa Hashem Legdi Tomid. It's like God is in your presence, and literally in the presence, He's interacting, allowing you to experience something at a level which is one of a kind, only because it's within the context of a court. He says in Pirkei Avos that if 10 people study Torah, Shechini Mayim, the Shechinah is with them. 5 people studying Torah, Shechini Mayim. 3 people learning Torah, Shechini Mayim. 2 people studying Torah, Shechini Mayim. 1 person, Shechini Mayim. So the Maral asks, if the Shechinah is even 1 person, you have to tell me it's with 10 people, with 5 people, with 3 or 2. It's understood. If the Shechinah is even with 1, in every one of these contexts, the Shechinah is there. That's the Maral's question.
So the Maral explains the Mishnah, it doesn't mean saying the same level of Shechina. The different levels of prayer. Look, the Shechina is all over. Yerushalayim, the Shechina is there. For instance, Kochim Kalim, eat a shlomim. You're not permitted to eat it outside the walls of Yerushalayim. But a chatos, a sin offering, that only a Kohen can eat, or a guilt offering, or the mincha, where is that eaten? That's eaten within the confines of the sanctuary. Because it's a more advanced korban, therefore it has to be in the location of the Shechina. What do you mean? The Shechina is in Yerushalayim also. Because you can't eat the Kochim Kalim, the Shlomim, or the Toda, you can't eat outside of Yerushalayim. It's a different level of Shechina, a different level of intensity. Whatever that means, it's a different intensity of Shechina. So we speak of the Shechina in the Lishkas Agozis. It's a different level of Shechina. It's right alongside the Azorah. It's right alongside the sanctuary. The Sanhedrin Ketana, the court of 23, that's every community has that. It's a different reality. But whatever the Shechina is, if you're able to have the judge, a more advanced judge, it's an acknowledgement of what the reality of the court is. The court is only, its function is because the Shechina is with them. So if you acknowledge the Shechina is there, who do you have representing, interacting with that Shechina?
Is there not some notion?
Who should that group be? You're not permitted to plant an idolatrous tree. Asher is an idolatrous tree. Collates, any type of tree. Anything which is affixed to the ground. So Rashi cites the Gemara. This tree, from the time you plant it, afilo avodo, even though you didn't worship the tree. Ove below sase al tioso. You're not permitted to plant the tree there. Losita l'cho, collates, eitzel mizbach Hashem elokecho. Asor lote ilon, ulabone bayis barabayis. You're not permitted, not only plant anything which is affixed and is considered, has a degree of permanence, you're not permitted to put there. So of course, there's a question which the Gemara discusses. In Talmud and Rashi in the Gil discusses this. We know that every sabbatical cycle in the 8th year, what happened? The Jews on the first day, night of Cholamoid, what would they do? The whole Klal Yisrael would gather, men, women, and children on the Temple Mount, and who would read the Torah? The king would read Mishnah Torah. So they'd have to build a structure there, because he actually sat on an elevated structure, and he would read the Torah. So the question is, but how did they build that structure? It's what? You're not permitted to put anything which has any degree of permanence there. So how did they do it? Because the king, he sat and he read Mishnah Torah on the Temple Mount. So the Rishonim explained that simply it only had a temporary status. It was there, it was put together and taken away immediately. Therefore, this prohibition has no issue. But to put anything that has a degree of permanence, that's the Torah violation. The question is why? What's the reason? Now, the infrastructure, let's say the Torah has a certain infrastructure. It's called Tayag Mitzvos. 248 mitzvahs, 365 negative. Person says, I'd like to add an additional positive commandment. We just had 2 parshas. You're in violation of Lo Sosif. You can't add to the Torah. Person says, I don't think this really has any relevance to my life. We're going to detract from the Torah. Negative commandment. There's a certain, whatever we have in the physical world is only a reflection of the spiritual infrastructure of existence. The Beis HaMikdash, the way it was built, or the Mishkan, even the shapes of the vessels, whatever it was, it's whatever Moshe Rabbeinu saw at Sinai. He was given a blueprint, and they followed that blueprint. But why is that the blueprint? Because for the world to function and to achieve and to address, to meet its purpose and objective, it has to function within a certain infrastructure. If it's not the infrastructure which God sets, it's not going to happen.
Therefore, the infrastructure based on Mikdash is whatever's supposed to be permanent is supposed to be permanent there. To attach anything else to that location, which has a degree of permanence, you're altering the infrastructure. If that's the case, it's a Torah violation. It's like you're throwing a monkey wrench into the story. The Gemara says in Chulin, what's kishuv? Sorcery is a Torah violation. A sorcerer is put to death. Why is a sorcerer put to death? We're not talking about sleight of hand. A sorcerer means he's able, through the nether forces, to manipulate the energies which Hashem sends into this world to allow things to manifest themselves the way they manifest themselves. The Gemara says, Kishuv shema chishim pamali shamalo. Kishuv means sorcery is they undermined the heavenly retinue of angels, and they're not able to function as they're meant to function. So because you're disrupting God's order, that's why the sorcerer is liable for the death penalty. That's called machishim pamali shamalo. Palmalish means the heavenly retinue. Machishim, you're actually contradicting them. You're interfering with them. Punished by death. What's the halacha if you want to crossbreed a crop? You're not promoted to crossbreed animals and crops. Why not? We find the beginning creation, when Hashem created the various species, it says, lemino. He created this lemino according to its species. Keeps repeating, lemino. When God created this world, it was created in a certain pure sense, and that's the way he wants the world to function. God doesn't want you to start tampering with his creation. Even though within nature you could crossbreed, God doesn't want that. So what he's doing is you're altering God's creation. Because God says for the world to function in its ultimate level, it's in this context. The moment you start crossbreeding, altering, it's not limino. It's not, that wasn't the original intention of creation. Therefore, the world is thrown off. It's off balance. Because the ultimate level of function is this particular function. That's why it's a Torah violation. Same here. This is the hub of spirituality, God's presence in the world. Could you imagine a person, he designs a house, the king, he gives the blueprint, he okays it. It's an underling says, I think we're going to alter it. Where do you have the chutzpah? Where do you have the audacity to alter it? The king's, his resonance is the way he said it to be, because that's the way he wants it to function. But here it's even more. The world has an objective. That objective to be met as it's supposed to, it's only in a certain context. You alter that infrastructure, it doesn't function that way. The Mizbeach, everything had certain specifications. And if it would have been a different specification, a little smaller, a little larger, no. If it wasn't the specification which was set by the Torah, the Shulchan, the Mizbeach, the Oron, it's not a valid vessel. But what difference does it make? It makes a difference. Therefore, any permanent structure in that location has a certain degree of representation. You alter that infrastructure, you're throwing it off kilter. That's the reason why it's Torah violation. Had probably Stukim, the Second Temple period, there were Sadducees. The Sadducees, they only accepted the written law, they didn't accept the oral law. A Sadducee, his tefillin were not square the way our tefillin was made. It had like an oval shape. So the Gemara said, the Mishnah says, if you see a person wearing those kind of tefillin, you don't allow him to go to the Omer, to be the Shlich Tzibur, because he's a Sadducee. Tefillin have to be square. They have to be made exactly as prescribed at Sinai. But that's Torah Shabbat Peh. We don't believe, we think this is what tefillin, the way they're supposed to look. This is our tradition. It could be your tradition, but that's not what God said. Because God says tefillin have to meet certain specifications and certain criteria. If it's not tefillin. But I had the best sofer, I did it with Lishma. I had all the various intents. You could have all the intent in the world. If you don't meet the criteria Hashem set in place, it's not functional.
doesn't bring about, doesn't do what it's supposed to do. You must wear the tefillin exactly, not beyond your hairline. It has to be centered. Does it really make a difference? It does make a difference because Hashem says, "Totofos beinenecho." It's best to be worn in that specific location. That's when it becomes functional. It's not there, doesn't function. And one does not fulfill the mitzvah of wearing tefillin. Okay?
And so